She said, "A real man would support my career, not question my business trips." I said, "Okay." So I started supporting her in a way she never expected. She found out how supportive I was when a private investigator's report showed up. I, 34M, thought I was being the perfect supportive husband. Turns out, I was being the perfect fool. The first red flag should have been when my wife started taking business trips to cities where her company didn't even have offices. But I was too busy being the understanding husband she claimed she needed. It started 6 months ago when she got promoted to regional sales manager. Suddenly, she was traveling twice a month, sometimes 3 times. Austin, Denver, Portland, always somewhere that required overnight stays. When I asked about the specifics of these trips, she'd get defensive immediately. She told me a real man would support his wife's career ambitions instead of questioning every detail like some insecure child. She said successful women needed partners who trusted them completely, not husbands who acted like controlling fathers. The way she said it made me feel small, like I was holding her back from something important. So I decided to be supportive. Really supportive. I started doing everything around the house during her trips. Laundry, groceries, cooking, cleaning, the whole domestic routine. When she came back from Denver looking exhausted, I had her favorite meal ready and didn't ask a single question about her trip. When she returned from Austin with expensive new clothes, I complimented how professional she looked and never mentioned the price tags I accidentally saw. But being truly supportive meant I needed to understand her career better. So I started paying attention. I noticed she always booked her own flights and hotels, never going through the company travel department like she used to. When I casually mentioned this seemed inefficient, she explained that her new position came with more autonomy over travel arrangements. She said the company preferred it this way for tax purposes. I also noticed her phone habits changed. She started taking calls in the bathroom or stepping outside when certain numbers appeared on her screen. When I asked about it, she said clients often called at odd hours and she didn't want to disturb me with work conversations. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago. She announced another trip to Portland, this time for 4 days. She seemed excited about it in a way that felt different from her usual business trip demeanor. There was something almost giddy in how she packed her suitcase, choosing outfits more carefully than usual. That's when I decided to be the most supportive husband possible. I contacted Morrison Investigations the day after she left. The receptionist asked what kind of investigation I needed, and I explained I wanted to surprise my wife by documenting her business success. I told them I wanted to create a photo album of her professional achievements, pictures of her at conferences, meeting with clients, giving presentations. I said it would be an anniversary gift showing how proud I was of her career. The investigator assigned to my case seemed initially confused by the request, but I convinced him it was a romantic gesture. I gave him her hotel information, her supposed meeting locations, and her travel itinerary. I asked him to be discreet and just document her professional activities from a distance. Meanwhile, I was being the perfect supportive husband at home. I deep cleaned the entire house, organized her office space, and even researched her company's clients in Portland so I could ask informed questions about her meetings when she returned. She called me every night from Portland, sounding tired but happy. She told me about successful client presentations and potential new contracts. She described the hotel restaurant where she ate dinner alone and complained about the uncomfortable conference room chairs. Her stories were detailed and believable. The investigator called me on the second day of her trip. He asked if I was sure about the hotel address I'd given him, because he couldn't find my wife registered there. I double-checked the information she'd given me and confirmed it was correct. He said he'd keep looking. By the third day, he'd found her, just not where she was supposed to be. The preliminary photos arrived in my email that evening while I was preparing her favorite welcome-home dinner. The first image showed her entering a boutique hotel downtown, not the business hotel she'd told me about. She was wearing the red dress I'd bought her for our anniversary, the one she said was too fancy for everyday occasions. The second photo showed her in the hotel restaurant, but she wasn't eating alone. Across from her sat a man I didn't recognize. He looked about my age, maybe slightly older, wearing an expensive suit. They were leaning across the table toward each other, her hand covering his on the white tablecloth. More photos followed, them walking hand in hand down the street, him opening doors for her, her laughing at something he said, the same laugh I used to be able to trigger. They looked comfortable together, familiar, like they'd done this many times before. The final photo in that first batch showed them entering an elevator together. The investigator's timestamp showed it was taken at 11:47 p.m. I set my phone down and looked around our kitchen. The welcome home dinner I'd prepared was still simmering on the stove. Her favorite flowers were arranged in a vase on the counter. I'd even bought the expensive wine she'd been wanting to try. The investigator called an hour later. He asked if I wanted him to continue surveillance or if I'd seen enough. His tone was professional but gentle, like he'd delivered this kind of news before. I told him to document everything through the end of her trip. She came home the next evening with a small gift, a Portland coffee shop magnet for our refrigerator collection. She seemed genuinely happy to see me, hugging me tightly and thanking me for being so supportive of her career. She showed me photos on her phone from various Portland locations, professional-looking shots that could have been taken during legitimate business activities. Over dinner, she described her successful meetings in vivid detail. She talked about challenging clients and breakthrough presentations. She mentioned specific street names and restaurant recommendations. If I hadn't seen the investigator's photos, I would have believed every word. The complete report arrived 3 days later via secure email. 27 photographs and a detailed timeline of her activities. The man's name was included. He was a marketing director from Seattle, not even connected to her company. The investigator had tracked their activities across 2 full days and found no evidence of any business meetings whatsoever. Instead, he documented what appeared to be a romantic getaway. Couple spa treatments, wine tasting, a scenic dinner cruise, hotel room service delivered to a suite registered under the man's name. They'd spent both nights in the same room. The investigator had also run a background check on the man, discovering he was married with 2 children. His social media profiles showed a seemingly happy family life, with no indication he was involved with someone else. But the most revealing detail came at the end of the report. The investigator had traced their relationship timeline through digital records and public information. Credit card statements showed they'd been meeting regularly for over 8 months, long before her promotion and the increase in business travel. Hotels in Austin, Denver, Phoenix, and now Portland. Always the same pattern. Expensive accommodations, romantic activities, no business meetings. I spent 2 days reading and rereading the report, memorizing every detail. Part of me had hoped I was wrong, that there would be some innocent explanation for what I'd seen. But the evidence was comprehensive and undeniable. She announced another business trip yesterday. Chicago this time, for 3 days. She seemed excited again, that same giddy energy I'd noticed before Portland. She spent extra time choosing outfits and even bought new lingerie, claiming she'd read that dressing well boosted confidence in professional settings. I told her I thought it was wonderful how dedicated she was to her career advancement. I said I admired her commitment to excellence and wanted to support her however I could. She smiled and said she was lucky to have such an understanding husband. This morning, I helped her pack and drove her to the airport. I kissed her goodbye and told her I loved her. She said she'd call me tonight after her first day of meetings. Then I went home and made copies of the investigation report. I scheduled appointments with 3 different divorce attorneys for next week, wanting to understand my options fully before making any decisions. I also researched the married man she'd been seeing, finding his wife's contact information and social media profiles. She seemed like a nice woman, posting pictures of family vacations and school events with their children. The hardest part was realizing how long I'd been living in a carefully constructed fiction. Every business trip, every late-night phone call, every defensive response to my innocent questions, it had all been part of an elaborate deception. She hadn't just betrayed our marriage. She'd convinced me to enable the betrayal by making me feel guilty for having normal concerns about her sudden behavior changes. But what really bothered me was how good she'd become at lying. The detailed stories about client meetings, the authentic seeming exhaustion after her trips, the small gifts and local recommendations. She'd created an entire alternate reality and performed it convincingly for months. She called tonight as promised, describing her first day of meetings in Chicago. She sounded tired but positive, sharing details about challenging clients and promising leads. She asked about my day and seemed genuinely interested in my answers. I listened to every word and told her I was proud of how hard she was working. I said I missed her and looked forward to hearing about the rest of her trip. She said she missed me too and was grateful to have such a supportive husband. After hanging up, I opened my laptop and began typing an email to the married man's wife. I attached copies of all the investigation photos and reports. I explained who I was and how I discovered their spouse's relationship. I suggested we meet to discuss the situation before deciding how to proceed. Tomorrow morning, while my wife is supposedly in her first Chicago business meeting, I'll send that email. By the time she returns from her trip, both of our lives will have changed permanently. The investigator had offered to continue surveillance in Chicago, but I declined. I already had everything I needed to be truly supportive of her career. I was going to support her right into understanding exactly what kind of man she'd actually married. Update 1. The married man's wife responded to my email within 2 hours. Her name was Sarah, and her first message was brief but direct. She asked if we could meet that same day, saying she'd suspected something was wrong for months but hadn't known how to investigate. She lived about an hour away and was willing to drive to meet me anywhere I felt comfortable. We met at a coffee shop downtown at 3 in the afternoon. Sarah turned out to be a kindergarten teacher, probably around 30, with tired eyes and a nervous energy that reminded me of myself. She brought a notebook and had obviously been crying recently. She told me she'd noticed her husband's behavior changes about 8 months ago, the same timeline the investigator had established. Mysterious phone calls, unexpected overnight trips, new clothes and cologne, sudden interest in fitness and appearance. When she'd questioned him about it, he'd accused her of being paranoid and controlling. What struck me most was how similar our situations were. Both of our spouses had become masters of gaslighting, turning their suspicious behavior into our character flaws. We'd both been made to feel guilty for having normal concerns about dramatic personality changes. Sarah had brought her own evidence. Screenshots of credit card charges at expensive restaurants and hotels during times when her husband claimed to be traveling alone for work. Receipts for jewelry and flowers that never made it home to her. Phone records showing hundreds of calls to the same number, my wife's number. We spent 2 hours comparing timelines and evidence. Every business trip my wife had taken corresponded perfectly with unexplained absences or overnight work trips her husband had told Sarah about. They'd been coordinating their lives across 2 households for months. The most painful revelation came when Sarah showed me her husband's social media activity. He'd been checking in at restaurants and locations that perfectly matched my wife's supposed business dinner stories. She'd been feeding me details from their actual romantic dates, reframing intimate moments as professional obligations. Sarah asked what I planned to do with the information. I told her about the divorce attorney appointments and asked about her intentions. She said she needed to think about it because of their children, but she was leaning towards separation at minimum. We exchanged contact information and agreed to keep each other updated as situations developed. Having someone who understood exactly what I was going through felt like a lifeline I hadn't known I needed. That evening, my wife called from Chicago as scheduled. She described another successful day of client meetings and mentioned grabbing dinner at a steakhouse near her hotel. I asked casual questions about the restaurant and the food, taking notes as she provided details. After hanging up, I called Sarah and shared my wife's descriptions of her Chicago evening. Sarah confirmed her husband had texted her earlier about working late on a presentation and grabbing dinner near his hotel. The restaurant details matched perfectly. They were in Chicago together, probably at that very moment, while simultaneously lying to both of us about their activities. Update 2. My wife returned from Chicago yesterday afternoon with another small gift, a deep dish pizza magnet, to add to our collection. She seemed relaxed and happy, showing me photos from various Chicago landmarks and describing successful client presentations in impressive detail. I'd spent her absence consulting with divorce attorneys and preparing for multiple scenarios. The general consensus was that I had strong grounds for divorce and favorable positioning for asset division, especially given the documentation of infidelity and deception. But something unexpected happened during our reunion dinner. Sarah had texted me throughout the day with updates about her husband's behavior since returning from his Chicago trip. He'd been unusually attentive and affectionate, bringing her flowers and suggesting they plan a weekend getaway together. It was classic cheating behavior, compensating for guilt through exaggerated romantic gestures. My wife was exhibiting the same pattern. She'd prepared my favorite meal without being asked, suggested we book a vacation together, and been more physically affectionate than she'd been in months. The guilt-driven overcompensation was almost textbook. But watching her perform this caring wife routine while knowing the truth created a strange clarity. Every gesture felt calculated. Every smile seemed rehearsed. I could see the performance underneath the affection. During dinner, she asked about my week and seemed genuinely interested in my answers. She apologized for being so focused on work lately and said she wanted to make more time for us as a couple. She suggested we start having regular date nights and maybe take a long weekend trip soon. I found myself studying her facial expressions, looking for tells or signs of deception. The investigator's training had rubbed off on me. I was cataloging microexpressions and verbal patterns like I was conducting my own surveillance. The strangest part was realizing I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no betrayal in that moment. Just a cold, analytical distance that let me see our entire relationship with new eyes. After dinner, she suggested we watch a movie together, something we hadn't done in months. She curled up against me on the couch, and I could feel her wedding ring against my arm. The whole scene was perfectly domestic and completely hollow. I'd already decided to confront her, but I wanted to choose the timing carefully. The divorce attorneys had advised documenting as much as possible and approaching the confrontation strategically rather than emotionally. This morning, she announced another business trip. Seattle this time, next week for 4 days. The irony wasn't lost on me. Seattle was where her boyfriend lived. She was probably planning to visit his home territory, maybe meet his friends, or see his regular haunts. I told her I thought the trip sounded productive and asked if she needed help with anything before she left. She seemed pleased by my continued support and said she felt lucky to have a husband who understood her career ambitions. That afternoon, I called the investigator and arranged for surveillance in Seattle. This time, I wasn't pretending it was for a romantic surprise. I wanted comprehensive documentation of their activities, including evidence of where they stayed and how long they spent together. I also contacted Sarah and shared the Seattle trip information. Her husband had just announced a sudden work emergency requiring him to travel to the West Coast next week. The timing was perfectly coordinated again. Sarah asked if I was ready to confront them yet. I told her I wanted one more piece of evidence, something that would make denial impossible and provide complete closure. The Seattle trip would be their last secret getaway. Update 3. She left for Seattle 3 days ago, and everything unraveled faster than I'd anticipated. The investigator called me on the first day with an update that changed my entire approach. He'd followed my wife from the airport to a residential neighborhood in Seattle's suburbs. Instead of going to a hotel, she'd gone directly to a house with a white picket fence and children's bikes in the driveway. Her boyfriend's house, where he lived with Sarah and their kids. The investigator watched her use a key to enter through the back door while the family car was gone from the garage. She'd been inside for 6 hours before leaving in a taxi. The implications were staggering. She had access to his house and was meeting him there while his wife and children were away. But that wasn't the most shocking part. Sarah called me that evening, crying and barely coherent. Her husband hadn't traveled anywhere for work. He'd been coming home every night as usual, acting perfectly normal. She decided to test his honesty by asking specific questions about his supposed business trip, and he'd given her detailed answers about meetings and client presentations. He was lying about being in Seattle, but my wife was definitely there, which meant she wasn't meeting him for a romantic getaway. The investigator's second-day report solved the mystery and created an entirely new problem. My wife had been using her boyfriend's house as a base of operations for something else entirely. The surveillance photos showed her meeting with 3 different men over 2 days, each visit lasting several hours. None of them were her boyfriend. The investigator had managed to get license plate numbers and run preliminary background checks. 2 of the men were married executives from major corporations. The third was a prominent local attorney. All of them had expensive cars and obviously significant financial resources. My supportive investigation had uncovered something much bigger than a simple affair. That evening, my wife called with her usual check-in story about successful meetings and challenging clients. But this time, I asked specific questions about her hotel and the clients she was supposedly meeting. Her answers were vague and inconsistent, completely different from her usually detailed reports. When I pressed for more specifics about her meeting locations, she became defensive and accused me of not trusting her professional judgment. She said she was disappointed that I was reverting to controlling behavior just when her career was reaching new heights. But her voice sounded different. strained and artificial in a way I hadn't noticed before, or maybe hadn't wanted to notice. After hanging up, I called the investigator and asked him to expand the surveillance. I needed to know exactly what kind of meetings my wife was conducting and why she needed access to her boyfriend's house to conduct them. The third day's report arrived this morning via encrypted email, and I immediately understood why my wife had been so secretive about her business activities. The photographs were explicit and left no room for interpretation. My wife wasn't just having an affair. She was running some kind of high-end escort operation, using her boyfriend's house as a meeting location while he was at work and his family was away. The investigator had documented money changing hands, photographed license plates of expensive cars, and established a pattern of wealthy clients paying significant amounts for private encounters. Her business trips hadn't been about cheating on me with one person, they'd been about building a clientele in multiple cities. Everything suddenly made sense. The expensive clothes, the carefully planned travel schedules, the defensive attitude about her professional activities, the detailed cover stories about client meetings. She'd been running a business, just not the kind she'd led me to believe. The investigator estimated, based on the evidence he'd gathered, that she'd been generating substantial unreported income for months. The financial implications for our marriage and my potential liability were enormous. I spent the morning consulting with both divorce attorneys and a criminal defense lawyer. The situation had moved far beyond simple infidelity into potential legal territory involving tax evasion, prostitution, and fraud. My wife is scheduled to return tomorrow evening. She texted this morning saying she'd had breakthrough meetings with several potential clients and was excited to share the good news about her expanding business opportunities. I've decided to confront her as soon as she gets home, but now I'm armed with evidence of activities she never imagined I'd discover. The investigator's report is sitting in a sealed envelope on our kitchen table, along with printed copies of every photograph and financial record we'd been able to compile. Sarah deserves to know what her husband's house has been used for, but I'm not sure how to explain that her marriage problems are actually much more complicated than simple adultery. Tomorrow night, my supportive husband act ends, and my wife discovers exactly how thorough my support for her career advancement has been. The magnet collection on our refrigerator suddenly looks like evidence of a criminal enterprise rather than innocent business travel souvenirs. She wanted a husband who wouldn't question her business trips. She got exactly what she asked for.